The year is 2003. It's October 31st, Halloween, and the rare instance where this holiday falls on a Friday. You wore your costume to school, got lots of candy, watched movies, and did various Halloween activities all day with little to no actual schoolwork. And now you are going home to prepare for the amazing night ahead. You get home, have no homework, and turn on the TV to see what cartoons are showing their Halloween episodes. As the evening approaches, you call up your friends to prepare for the best night of trick-or-treating ever. The last time it was Friday or Saturday on Halloween was 1997 and 1998, when you were 6 and 7 years old. Sure, that was fun, but you still had a pretty strict bedtime. Now, you're 12 and way more mature, ready to tackle the greatest night of the year with your friends. Halloween carries with it some of the best memories I have growing up. I was always a night owl, so being able to walk around at night was the best, and this specific year was an amazing experience that I remember quite well, and I don't believe I ever got as full of a bag of candy any other night than I did this particular Halloween. I remember my group of friends actually returning home to dump our bags because they got so heavy, then going back out again for round 2. It was amazing. This video is a bit of a surprise. I wanted to do something for Halloween and realized I was quickly running out of time, so here it is. I hope you enjoy it as, at the very least, a Halloween treat as we take a deep dive into the Halloween iceberg. So grab a snack, get comfy, this is going to be a not so long video. Let's get started. Trick or treat, smell my feet. Let's start with the infamous children's jingle that we all remember. It's hard to find an origin to this well-known tune, and it appears that the words, specifically the last third, is the most often changed. Growing up in Southern California, I always knew it as trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat. If you don't, I don't care, I'll pull down your underwear. I always assumed the act of pulling down someone's underwear was meant to be in the spirit of the pranks and tricks portion of Halloween, because, after all, when you knock on a door, you say trick or treat. If you don't get a treat, you'll play a trick on them, or something like that. In my research online, I've found numerous alternatives to this last line, such as, I'll just eat your underwear, you can smell my underwear, I'll just steal your underwear. Some have even said that they only heard trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat with no additional lines. Another variation I came across in my research was trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat, not too big, not too small, just the size of Montreal, which apparently is a bit more common in Canada. Regardless, finding the true origin of the trick or treat jingle has been quite difficult, as it appears to simply be an oral tradition. One interesting note I found in my research was Quora user Julie Meyer stating that as a child, they would say, "We're the beggars of the street. Do we trick or do you treat?" which I really love. Julie states that this was over 65 years ago, so sometime in the late 1950s or early 1960s. It may be impossible to truly find the origin of this saying. My parents, who grew up in the late 60s and early 70s, remember the phrase being around during their childhood as well, so the origin of this ubiquitous chant may forever be a mystery. Saving candy. So this could either refer to adults holding on to candy that they still had left over from one Halloween to the next, which probably isn't a very good idea, or, from a kid's perspective, seeing how long you can save your candy for after Halloween has passed. Since this video is meant to be a nostalgic look back on Halloween, I'll go with the latter. There's nothing more satisfying than getting a massive trick-or-treat haul, getting back home and emptying your trick-or-treat bag on the floor to see all of the spoils of your efforts. To maximize my trick-or-treating, I'd always go out with a pillowcase, and often I'd get it pretty full of candy, and it'd be quite heavy by the end of the night. Depending on how much candy you get, it's very likely that it could last you for quite a few months, but did anyone ever try eating the candy at a pace that would hold them over until the following year? I never did. I guess I just had poor self-control. Also, unlike some parents that would take their kids' trick-or-treat bags and keep them put away to limit how much candy their kids would eat, my parents didn't do this, so it was always something to dig into after school, so my candy never lasted that long. Anyway, back to what I said earlier about getting home and dumping out your candy. I have a lot of memories of being out trick-or-treating and a house would drop something into your bag that you couldn't quite make out. My parents didn't want us digging into our bags while we were out trick-or-treating, so we'd have to wait until we got home, still wondering just what that was that they put into your bag. You'd pour it all out onto the floor to sort through your candy, and sometimes you'd find something kinda cool. I remember some people would give out glow sticks, some would give bags of various chips, which I'm personally a big fan of to mix it up a bit. You know, get a little bit of salty snacks in there to break up all the sweets. It's actually really smart. I also liked that some houses, self-aware of the small sizes of candy that they were handing out, would pre-bag them into little bundles of multiple pieces, not wanting to stiff kids on their candy collecting. I just always thought that was really nice of them. Of course, there were those houses that handed out the king-size candies, which is something that my family has started doing in recent years. As a kid, we always knew which houses would give out the king-sized bars and would always return to those houses every year, even if they were a bit out of the way. And now, that's kind of what my family's trying to do. The neighborhood I live at now is much smaller than where I lived in LA County growing up, and with that, there are significantly less trick-or-treaters, so we're trying to build up a reputation by delivering on the candy and decorating our house like crazy. The candy is such a big part of trick-or-treating, and getting a massive haul and seeing how long you can make it last was something I always tried to do, with little lasting success. Overpricing of costumes. As the school year began, the bitterness of summer ending would at least be dampened by the sweet arrival of the Party City ads, and, if you had a mom like mine, the Oriental Trader catalog. At this time of year, both of these would be chock full of the upcoming Halloween offerings, from new house and party decorations to fog machines to, of course, costumes. I'd always loved to see which new movies and TV shows were getting costumes that year, and some of them were quite expensive. I remember a costume that was really popular during the early 2000s was Ghostface, but not just any Ghostface. The Ghostface with the bleeding face. This was a typical Ghostface costume, however, the selling point that made this one unique and more expensive was that the mask had a pump that was shaped like a heart that you held in your hand, and when you squeezed it, blood would pour down the face. It was honestly a really cool effect. This was like one of the cool costumes to have. Along with Ghostface, I also remember there being a generic skull mask that was essentially the exact same costume, just the mask was different, and this costume was priced quite a bit higher than the other costumes as well, so if you had it, every kid was jealous. Another memory I have of expensive Halloween costumes was simply masks. Party City and other similar stores would have a wall of Halloween masks, and they all looked amazing, and I feel this has really died out in the last couple decades. Going to Spirit Halloween or any similar stores today, the mask selection is incredibly lacking. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there were so many masks featuring famous horror icons, unique concepts, and even this massive dragon mask that I always remember seeing as a kid, and I want to say it was often the most expensive mask of the bunch. As a kid, for whatever reason, my mom never wanted me to do anything scary for Halloween, despite how badly I'd want to, and nothing with a mask. Some of the costumes I did when I was really young, like before age 10, were Luke Skywalker, Pikachu, Harry Potter, Peter Pan, and a Bela Lugosi-style vampire. By the time I was 12 or 13, I was finally allowed to get one of the cool masks I'd see at the local Party City and just wore a generic black robe with it, and I realized, as cool as the masks look, trick-or-treating while wearing one is really difficult and a bit annoying. Wearing one to a party is kind of pointless because you wear it for maybe 30 minutes into the party, then you end up taking it off and you're just walking around wearing a black robe for the rest of the party because you can't eat or drink with it on, and conversing with people or taking part in any of the games or activities is a hassle. After I came to realize this, I started appreciating maskless costumes a lot more and accepted that my mom probably knew these things and was just trying to make my Halloween experience more enjoyable. I still can recall the exact moment when I first went trick-or-treating with a mask, thinking to myself that I couldn't see anything and having to awkwardly tilt my head up to see the much taller adults when trick-or-treating, and to the opposite of that, having to tilt my head really far down just to make sure I didn't trip on a curb or a house's steps. This point kind of devolved from talking about the prices of costumes being ridiculous to just talking about costumes in general. But really, I'm using this iceberg as an excuse to just talk about Halloween memories and nostalgia behind the holiday, so oh well. horror movies. I got into watching horror movies when I was around 12 or so, and if I'm remembering correctly, the first real horror movie that I watched was the 2003 remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is actually a really good remake. As much as I love the 1974 original, the remake does a really great job at retelling the story, adding new elements, and bringing a unique weight that allows it to stand on its own. Not to mention, Arlie Ermey as the sheriff. Every scene he's in is incredibly tense. His performance alone really sells this movie. Fittingly, I do believe it was around Halloween when I watched this, and after that, horror movies became a bit of a fascination of mine, and every October, my parents would buy more horror movies on DVD to add to our collection, meaning every year would mean watching old favorites and new movies of varying levels of quality. Growing up, I lived right next to a video store, so anytime one of my horror movie-loving friends stayed the night, we'd walk to the video store and rent a horror movie, and wow, we saw some really bad movies, but at that age, I don't recall being able to consider a horror movie as bad. There were, of course, movies and TV shows that I didn't care for, I just don't think I really had developed that critical mindset yet. Another thing, at that age and during that time, horror was much more uncommon amongst children. There was this almost adrenaline-like feeling you'd get anytime you'd put a horror movie on with your friends, because at this time, being exposed to horror wasn't quite as easy as it would become in the internet age. The adrenaline rush you'd have throughout the movie, trying to prepare for the next jump scare and to not get scared in front of your friends, overshadowed any poor acting or plot that the movie had to offer. And in the end, you'd say you enjoyed the movie simply because you made it through it. I feel kids who were born after the year 2000 were much more exposed to horror, given their ease of access to the internet, and horror properties aimed towards younger audiences like Five Nights at Freddy's, throwing jump scares in their faces at a young age. Older generations such as mine were certainly exposed to some really creepy things, but it was mostly in the form of imagery. The scary things that really stuck out to me when I was really young, specifically younger than the age of 12, were the pictures I'd see in the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books, which I was obsessed with and really started my love of urban legends, which I'm still very much enthralled with. I'd read those books at night, even while laying in bed before sleeping, and try really hard to not look at the pictures, but of course, my eye would still wander towards them. I think to a certain extent, children like to be scared, at least in situations where they truly know there's no actual threat. It's almost like you're challenging yourself, and when you're doing it on your own accord, you can let yourself experience those feelings and you eventually work up a tolerance for it. Back to movies, I remember watching The Exorcist in October of 2004 or 2005. I had stayed the night at a friend's house, and I had always heard this was, indeed, the scariest movie ever made. Of course, that's subjective, but at that age, a movie having that claim was something of a challenge, and watching it was certainly an experience. The parts of that movie that really stayed with me were the visuals. Linda Blair's makeup, the creepy subliminal flashing face. I think as a kid, I was very lacking in the ability to really comprehend what was happening in the story, or maybe I was just too distracted trying to not be scared that I wasn't even paying attention. And maybe that's what got me through a lot of horror movies as a kid, kind of like a defense mechanism in anticipation of the jump scares. I very much love The Exorcist to this day. It's among one of my favorite movies of all time. I think during my youth, like before the age of 12, October was more filled with watching Halloween specials or Halloween movies more made for children, which I'll definitely be getting into a bit further down the iceberg. Nowadays, it's a tradition to watch horror movies throughout October, and me and my friends do our best to complete the 31 movies challenge, watching one horror movie every day of the month. This point has become way longer than I expected, so to end it off, I'd just like to say my favorite horror movie of all time is Suspiria from 1977. It's certainly not for everyone, and can certainly be seen as dated, but I adore everything about this movie, from its story to its surreal, dreamlike visuals. I also really love The Descent. As someone who has explored abandoned mines before, that movie is always in the back of my mind whenever I do that. As hit or miss as they are, I do really love the VHS series of found footage films. They're really fun, especially to watch with friends. Now, I could talk about horror movies for hours on end. I didn't even talk about the Blair Witch Project, but I have a whole video about that, so on to the next. Illness of too much candy. Despite my statement a few entries back saying that I'd get through my candy rather quickly, I don't recall ever actually getting sick from eating too much at once, but I'm sure this has happened to some people. I guess I just had decent self-control knowing how much I could have in a single sitting without it causing me to get sick. Along with this point, tooth health should also be mentioned, since of course the high amount of sugar could lead to cavities, which I think is much more common, or at least it was when I was a kid. There are of course cases in which kids were made sick from candy that was tampered with, but this will of course be mentioned later on down the iceberg, so...
more on that later.
Jump scares in real life. So, my interpretation of this comes from instances where you'd be at a haunted house attraction or at a house trick-or-treating and someone jump scares you, which has certainly happened to me before. I have a memory of trick-or-treating one year and going up to this house, and they had this covered tarp-like tent thing for their cars in the driveway. And we go up to the door, and this guy in a werewolf mask jumps out from behind the tarp, scaring our entire group, and chased me down the driveway into the street. And it was hilarious. He chased me quite a ways too, if I remember correctly. I was probably about 10 or 11 when that happened. When I was 13, a yearly tradition started with my family in which we'd go to Knott's Scary Farm, and this continued for many years, and this was where I really built up a tolerance for jump scares. However, loud noises are still the one jump scare that always gets me, especially in movies. I really hate them because they're crafted specifically to be loud for the sole purpose of making you jump. Like, yeah, you made a loud noise from a long period of silence, but I'm not scared, it's just a startling loud noise. Like, that's not a challenge, you didn't accomplish anything of value. I just have a real gripe with loud noises in horror movies. Like, it actively annoys me when horror movies feel the need to add them in, because I feel that it means they're acknowledging that what they're showing on screen isn't enough, and instead, playing a sound that peaks above the rest of the movie's audio level was required to get the audience reaction they wanted. The only jump scares I find to be acceptable are ones that are consistent with the plot and make sense in universe. Playing a loud sound when a character turns around and sees something is not an acceptable jump scare, it's a cheap trick. Now, you may say this isn't fair, and it may be an unpopular opinion, but the only place I find this acceptable is in Five Nights at Freddy's and other games that are similar to that. And my reason why is because the game explicitly says that jump scares are its entire gimmick. Even before the game starts, it outright tells you that it relies on jump scares, and you know what, I can appreciate them coming right out and saying it. Visually, Five Nights at Freddy's isn't the scariest thing. Even the withered animatronics and nightmare animatronics, while creepy, aren't going to scare you enough on their own, so they acknowledge that the jump scare accompanied by the loud audio is necessary for the effect they're going for, and I respect that. Sorry, this kind of became a tangent on the exact opposite of jump scares in real life, but there wasn't really much to that. I guess it could also be referring to, like, taking your trash out at night and you open your trash can and an angry raccoon jumps out. That'd be a jump scare in real life. So, yeah. Realistic decorations. The evolution of Halloween decorations is certainly interesting, and you can see as the aesthetics evolve as time goes on. From the 50s to the 70s, you see a lot of a spooky aesthetic, with a lot of focus on witches, cats, ghosts, nothing horrific or scary, and if I'm being honest, this is one of my favorite Halloween aesthetics. Into the 80s, you see a lot of these decorations still being used, most famously the Beastal die cuts, which are so popular, reproductions even exist today, and originals are quite expensive amongst collectors, but you also start to see the emergence of blow mold decorations. Now, blow mold decorations actually date back to the late 40s and 50s, but when I think of blow molds, the 70s and 80s are the eras that I immediately think of. Many of my friends and family collect vintage decorations, and I myself have even amassed a small collection over the years, but lately the decorations that are starting to spike in price are from the 90s and early 2000s. This era started introducing much more realistic and gore-focused decorations, and many of these pieces are incredibly nostalgic to me. I remember seeing a lot of these at local party stores and at the houses that would go all out with their decorations during that era. Some of these decorations are incredibly gory, past the point of realistic gore and into the realm of absurdity, but it's still really awesome to see. Some decorations, however, are subtle enough to be considered realistic, and every year, there are always reports of neighbors complaining that one house went too far, and that their decorations were way too scary. You know, think of the children and all that. When I was a kid, there was a house near our neighborhood that went all out to a level beyond any other house. We called it the Witch House, mostly because among the decorations, this house had 3 incredibly lifelike witch mannequins on top of the roof. They looked so real, and if I'm recalling correctly, the owner of the house was some sort of special effects film worker or something along those lines. Another amazing effect they had was in the window of their garage, a decapitated head suspended above a bucket would continuously drain blood with a strobe light on it. It looked so real and amazing. It was an awesome experience, and a house that my family would be sure to visit every year. On top of candy, they even gave out hot apple cider, and eventually the house became so popular that the local church on the same street complained because of the traffic, which did eventually lead to them toning it down a bit, which was quite a bummer. Today, realistic decorations are the norm, and you can find them every year at Spirit Halloween. Various animatronics, figures, and props featuring varying degrees of gore. Halloween decor is truly an amazing industry, and seeing the creativity that some people put into these props is truly astounding. Every year, I love to look up cool decorations that people have made by hand using cheap, everyday items that you can get at a hardware store. Sometimes, however, these decorations may be a little too real.
More on that later.
Halloween specials of TV shows. Throughout the decades, TV shows having a Halloween episode, or if you're lucky, a Halloween episode every year, was a given. Part of the fun of October was when you'd get home from school, turn on Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network, and your favorite cartoon would be airing its newest Halloween episode, getting you into the holiday spirit. Even live-action shows would do this, from Family Matters to Happy Days to Roseanne. Honestly, almost any show that ran in an episodic format had at least one Halloween episode, with this tradition starting either in the late 60s or early 70s. Watching these episodes has become a yearly tradition of mine, even if it's from shows that I didn't necessarily watch all that much. On one of my many antique and thrifting adventures, I came across a 1995 TV recorded tape of a Simpsons Treehouse of Horror marathon on Fox, complete with all of the commercials, and this is something that I put on quite often, even when it's not October, just for the nostalgia. I remember watching the Halloween episodes of Family Matters with my sister, and being at a neighbor's house and watching the Muppet Babies Halloween episode, as well as the Garfield Halloween special, which actually came out before the Garfield and Friends series aired. I was also a big fan of Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman, which has that song Monks on a Mission, which is a total Halloween staple. Well, to me anyway. Hey Arnold had some really good spooky episodes that, while not necessarily Halloween themed, definitely fit the holiday. Phineas and Ferb had multiple Halloween episodes which were all great. Over the Garden Wall is also essential Halloween viewing material. Another thing I loved about Halloween was that not only would the shows feature Halloween episodes, but sometimes even the TV stations themselves would have Halloween-themed bumpers, promos, and station IDs. I'm honestly not even sure if live TV even does this anymore, since I just take it into my own hands to craft the perfect selection of shows for my Halloween viewing experience. It's certainly a nostalgic aspect of the holiday to sit back and enjoy as you eat some of those Pillsbury sugar cookies with ghosts and pumpkins printed on them. Of course, there are some shows that stick to a Halloween-like vibe all year round, and we'll be talking about one of those in the next entry. The Addams Family. The Addams Family is a multimedia property created by Charles Addams and first appeared as a comic in the magazine The New Yorker in 1938. The titular family have since gone on to appear in movies, TV shows, video games, virtually every form of media you could possibly think of. The series focuses on the Addams family and their various adventures, from day-to-day life to traveling on vacation and interacting with those who are a bit less eccentric than the family themselves. Despite their appearance to others who take them as off-putting and dark, Their family is arguably closer than any other sitcom family in TV history. The 1964 Addams Family series was what really brought the Addams Family into the mainstream, spawning the instantly iconic theme song and actually being the first to give names to the family and truly cementing the personalities of the characters and the dynamics between them. Throughout the years, the Addams Family would have various other live-action and animated adaptations, though for the most part, many of the characters' personalities would hold true, while some of the adaptations would make changes to the characters for better or for worse. The Addams Family is still relevant in the cultural zeitgeist, most recently thanks to the success of the Netflix series Wednesday, and I'm sure will continue to be a Halloween staple for decades. Halloween gaming. Whether it's horror games or multiplayer games incorporating a little spookiness for the month, partaking in some gaming throughout October is a must. I especially love playing Silent Hill during October, and as a kid, playing Resident Evil 3 at my neighbor's house was the scariest thing ever. We'd also play Resident Evil outside at night using laser tag guns and pretending we were the characters. The street I lived on had no streetlights, so it was always really dark between the houses, with plenty of places to hide and scare ourselves. Nearly every live service game from Fortnite to Call of Duty partake in Halloween in some way, from something as simple as some horror-themed character skins, to covering the entire map in a creepy overlay and adding special rewards. One game that always held a very October vibe to me was Majora's Mask, and maybe that's because of, well, the masks, and the creepy atmosphere, but in recent years, I've actually made Majora's Mask a Thanksgiving tradition. Where I live, the weather actually doesn't start getting cold until November, and Majora's Mask has always felt very much like a cold autumn weather game to me, but it was one that I associate very much with the Halloween season, and I think that's because I first played it around the end of October when I was a kid, so it very much fits that season. Sometimes just a quick spooky gaming session is enough to enhance your holiday spirit, and though I never played any of the games that came after, the game Slender was one that I played in October of 2012, and it's such a small, simple game that can run on even the lowest end computers. Playing that game with some of my friends over was a lot of fun, getting jump scared and seeing how far we could get. In October of 2023, I played Phasmophobia with a group of friends, and that was also a wonderful experience, and some of the most fun I've ever had in a multiplayer game, especially because of my obsession with ghosts and the paranormal. Spooky. So, this is a bit of a vague point, but I believe it simply refers to the spooky aspects of Halloween, as opposed to scary. Spooky, to me, is an aesthetic, like an image of a house with orange and yellow leaves blowing around in the front, and the decorations of the house consisting of white sheet ghosts, witches, and pumpkins. It offers this warm comfiness that's hard to put into words, but I also believe that it varies from person to person. Decorating with spiderwebs and gravestones can count as spooky, a cauldron with smoke coming out of it. In a lot of ways, there's a simplicity to the spooky aesthetic that really requires the right amount, because if you over-decorate, it can muddy the vibe a bit. The old Beastal die-cut paper decorations fit the spooky theme, the old blow mold light-up decorations. What I've been showing throughout this point is very much what I consider to be spooky, and I do think that a lot of what is considered spooky does come mostly from nostalgia and comfort. Spooky is very cozy, whereas scary is more cold and chilling, I guess. You know, because it's Halloween. I love both styles of decorating and appreciate all Halloween decor, from the disturbingly macabre to the whimsical and charming. I suppose spooky also has a bit of an antiquated appearance as well, because as the decades have gone on, Halloween decorations have become a lot more complex and more horror-focused, though you do occasionally still come across spooky decorations, but they're often mimicking the style of antique decorations. Virtual Zoom Call Halloween. This point kind of dates this Iceberg to when it was created, as luckily we haven't been on lockdown for years now, and COVID isn't as big of a concern in recent years. Though I had already been out of school for quite a few years, I can only imagine how bittersweet lockdown was for those in school at the time. The joy of being able to stay home from school is fairly universal among most kids, and I'm sure it was fun for a little while, but then classes resumed online, and transitioning to that, and realizing that also meant none of the fun that holidays bring to school must have been quite a bummer. Some teachers tried their best to bring the holiday spirit to their online class, and various YouTube videos exist showing costume ideas and Halloween-themed games that could be played over Zoom, so luckily there was at least a little bit of Halloween joy to still be had. Halloween at school was always such a fun time though, so missing that must have been a real downer. I have so many great memories of dressing up and going to school, and all of the fun activities the teachers would prepare for the day to get everyone into the Halloween spirit. Rewearing former Halloween costumes. This actually wasn't something I did until I was older and invested not only my own money, but more of it into costumes that I wanted. Since the costumes I've invested in are of high quality, I've often reused them some years, and will even add parts to them as time goes on. From a more nostalgic kid's point of view, however, I'm sure reusing costumes, especially if you had an older sibling, was a lot more common in families with multiple kids, though I didn't experience it all that much since I only had an older sister. What I did do, however, was reuse old costumes for props for my family's yearly Halloween party, and surprisingly enough, some of those costumes still exist to this day and are still used yearly. Unfortunately, many of the masks have deteriorated over the years and reached a point where they could no longer be used, but the robes and some of the other props are still in my family's possession and are still used every year. Another aspect of this is going to thrift stores and seeing the loads of Halloween costumes and decorations that they have. As someone who frequents thrift stores on the hunt for treasure, I've found many vintage decorations, but never really look at the costumes too much myself. In recent years, thrift stores like Goodwill really go hard on Halloween in both advertisements and store real estate, with a huge portion of their stores dedicating space to Halloween costumes. Bullying over costumes. Okay, this one is really mean, and luckily I didn't have any experience with this personally, but of course there are children who did have to deal with some jerk kids bullying them over their choice of costume. But honestly, the bullying was probably happening beforehand, and the costume was just one more thing for the bullies to make fun of. I don't really have much to say about this point, but it does remind me, if you don't mind me going back to the Halloween specials point for a moment. So many shows had that one episode where it's about the main character wanting to wear something scary, but their parent gets them, like, a cute costume, or more often than not, they, made it or something. So then the kid wears the costume their parent made for them, only to switch costumes later, and it's always something where they wear the costume to impress or scare the kid who's a bully, and somehow the parent eventually finds out, and you get that moment where they're really sad that the kid didn't like the costume, and the kid usually eventually comes around and apologizes and all that stuff, then switches to the costume their parent had prepared for them. I think even the Goosebumps book and episode The Haunted Mask had a similar premise. I haven't watched the episode or read the book in a really long time, but I think the main character's mom had made, a cute costume for her, but she instead goes to the store and gets the haunted mask. That horrifying show, Angela Anaconda, also did this trope, and I never watched Angela Anaconda as a kid because it was so repulsive to me, and I actually only just found out they did this trope when doing research for this video. Halloween songs. Okay, Halloween songs. There are so many. I don't even know what to do here except list them off, but can I just say, I am so tired of the Ghostbusters theme. I think it's because it's just so repetitive. 1 year is not enough time for me to go without hearing that song. I need 2 years, maybe 3. At least the Monster Mash is classic. It has such a fun vibe, and its audio aesthetic really gives that 1960s spooky vibe. There's something kind of old sounding about it that I just don't mind hearing every year. Sure, it's cheesy, but sometimes that's part of the charm, and I really don't mind it. Now, for these next two songs, I enjoy them all year round, but I do need to mention the two Hex Girls songs from Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost. They're both iconic and perfect. Then, of course, there's pop songs like Thriller, Superstition, songs from movies like Cry Little Sister from The Lost Boys. That's a mandatory Halloween song right there, especially with the spooky sounding synthesizers. I really love that song. There are so many songs that fit the Halloween aesthetic that talking about all of them would simply be way too much, but one group that I find to be rather underrated is the band Creature Feature. I'm not even sure if they're even around anymore, but their album Greatest Show on Earth was one that I listened to a lot back when it came out. It's a perfect Halloween album. As a matter of fact, I remember one year at Knott's Scary Farm, they were playing Creature Feature songs in the clown area of the park, which is fitting. Their songs kind of have that creepy carnival composition to them, and that's the only time I've ever heard Creature Feature out in public. I've never even heard anyone talk about them, but I thought they were pretty fun. There's also rock songs you always hear around Halloween, like Donovan's Season of the Witch, The Misfits' Scream, Susie and the Banshees' Spellbound, Warren Zevon's Werewolves of London. The list just goes on and on, but I guarantee all of these songs find their way onto Halloween playlists. Oh, and I'm gonna say it one more time, Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman, Monks on a Mission. That song is perfect. The Simpsons' Treehouse of Horror. As I mentioned a few entries back, I'd found a VHS tape that had a 1995 Treehouse of Horror marathon on it, complete with all commercials. It's truly an amazing time capsule. Since The Simpsons' second season, Treehouse of Horror has been the series' tradition of giving us an anthology-style episode with multiple spooky shorts, often parodying popular movies or books, from Edgar Allan Poe stories to The Twilight Zone, to Amityville Horror, to even parodying Death Note. Even when The Simpsons was in its worst seasons, checking out what they were doing every year for Treehouse of Horror has become a tradition to many, or doing as I do and just watching the older episodes. I wasn't really able to watch The Simpsons growing up, as my parents were of the George Bush persuasion. I did, however, for my 13th birthday, receive a Treehouse of Horror collection on DVD from a friend, and I watched that DVD a lot. While it wasn't necessarily my first time watching The Simpsons, as I'd occasionally watch episodes at friends' houses, it was the first time I watched it on my own and really appreciated the references and humor, especially as I was getting more familiar with horror films. Halloween decorations on homes that cost over $1,000. Halloween can be a very expensive holiday, as costumes and decorations really have no limits. Every year, you see articles about people going absolutely crazy on decorating their house, and of course, that has to be expensive. And yeah, it is. And as the years go on, the complexity of these decorations and desire to create more elaborate displays only goes up. Luckily, you can find a lot of guides online about making really amazing looking props with simple items from a hardware store, but some people I guess just don't have time for that, and luckily for them, there are some companies out there that make animatronics that look like something you'd see at a theme park, and of course, some of them cost thousands of dollars. I think it's actually more likely that while people may spend thousands of dollars decorating their homes, it's more likely that they'll go for quantity as opposed to spending it all on one single prop. Or the opposite, maybe they buy one really expensive prop every year, and after so many years, they have a bunch of really expensive props. In my personal experience, much like the story I told earlier about the witch house, the owner of that house reportedly worked in the film industry, so he either had access to the props, or knew how to make them, or some situation like that. And if it's not that, people who go all out in their Halloween setups usually are crafty and have simply made a majority of the props they're using, or have modified cheaper props to look even better. I've seen many guides online on taking cheap decorations from Spirit Halloween and, through some touch-up paints and elbow grease, turning a cheap prop into something that looks much more convincing. But yeah, for those who aren't interested in doing this, you can just buy some animatronics, some of which price into the 5-figure region. Weird Halloween stories from Storybooth. So, I had to look up what Storybooth is, and it seems to be a YouTube channel that shares people's stories and animates them, which is cool. It kind of reminds me of when Planet Dolan used to do that. Does Planet Dolan still do that? Someone comment if Planet Dolan still does that. Anyway, It also appears that people submit their stories to this channel, but not only that, the person submitting the story is also the one reading them, so you get all of these different voices telling stories with varying levels of microphone quality, which is a bit jarring, but I mean, have you listened to my first 4 videos? I'm not really one to talk about audio quality. Anyway, this point specifically refers to Halloween stories, and there are quite a few of these. I went through the entire channel, listened to every creepy, scary, or Halloween-themed video, and, well, none of them were really that weird. I mean, they're weird in the sense that strange things happen in them, but I guess as someone who's used to listening to YouTubers like Darkness Prevails and Mr. Nightmare, whose whole channels are retelling creepy user-submitted stories, nothing was really that strange, and considering that the target demographic for this channel seems to skew quite young, the writing and narrations, because they're being narrated by those who wrote the stories, are quite hit or miss. And I mean no disrespect, that's kind of just how it goes when you write stories at a young age. I mean, I certainly am quite sloppy when it comes to putting words together, so I'm no better. Did you notice how long this sentence was? On the other hand, there were actually some submitted stories that were quite well written and spoken, so again, it's on a case-by-case basis. There was a really funny story about a girl at a slumber party, and the girl whose house she's at has a younger brother who sleepwalks and says creepy things. I thought that one was pretty funny. Some of them were about Halloween parties and dances, and simply the narrator interacting with their friends or their crush or something like that. So yeah, it's all in good fun. I don't really have too much else to say about it though. Myths on Halloween. So, I'm going to break this one into 2 parts, probably because I have a major fascination with myths and urban legends, and I want an excuse to talk about them, but also because this point could either be referring to popular urban legends and myths that simply seem to pop up every year, or it's talking about myths and urban legends specifically about Halloween. So, let's talk about that first one. One of the biggest would be the tampering of candy. In the past, the myth of needles, razor blades, poison, or drugs being put into children's candy with the sole purpose of causing harm was quite widespread, and from my research, reportedly dates back to the 1920s and 30s, which is way earlier than I had originally thought. From what I was able to find, any time children would get sick during this era, if the child had recently had candy, it would often be blamed on this, though no cases of illness or death have ever been confirmed, despite some doctors claiming to have treated children poisoned by candy, but this was a much less regulated time where claims could be made in a much smaller setting. Into the 1960s, 70s, and 80s was when this fear, as we know it, really enters the public eye, and public service announcements warning parents to be cautious and check their children's candy would be aired on TV. There are actually cases of candy being tampered with on Halloween, but these cases are few, and we'll talk about a couple as the iceberg goes on. Now, onto the myths and urban legends that often get brought up on Halloween. These urban legends are either incredibly popular on Halloween because they're party games, or the legend can take place on Halloween. We of course have Bloody Mary, the ritual where you chant her name 3 times in the mirror and she appears. That's a classic. There's that one legend about the babysitter watching some children, in some cases on Halloween night. She puts the children to bed but notices a creepy clown doll sitting in the room. The child complains about it being creepy, so the babysitter puts a blanket or something over it. Later, she gets a call from the parents who are checking in, and when she tells them about the clown doll, they say that they don't have a clown doll and to call the police. It's also a lot like the urban legend about the person hiding in the house and calling the babysitter, making threats and being creepy, and once the call is traced, it's revealed that the calls are coming from inside the house. I could go on for hours. I really should just do an urban legends iceberg. I'm gonna look into that. Sold out on all decorations and candy. So, I've never experienced a store being sold out of Halloween decorations or candy, maybe because I usually prepare pretty early. I could really only imagine this kind of thing happening if, you wait until the last minute to buy your Halloween supplies. I imagine stores like Spirit Halloween probably stop receiving inventory towards the end of the month, and all of those people scrambling to get their costumes and decorations in the last week before Halloween all have to pick over whatever's left. I honestly don't really have much else to say about this one. Toilet paper mummies. So, toilet paper mummies can be a game, and it can be a costume. The game I remember playing is that one person spins around and the other person unrolls toilet paper and wraps them up like a mummy. Usually this game is on a timer and the contestants are judged based off how well covered the mummy is, and if you can get through your roll of toilet paper without any tears. I remember playing this game at multiple Halloween parties as a kid and even at school, so I'm sure it's fairly well known and is still played to this day. You can also make a cheap Halloween costume by wrapping yourself up in toilet paper in a similar manner. There's also these really cute decorations I found where you take a toilet paper roll with a small amount of toilet paper left on them, attach googly eyes, and make them look like mummies, which I really love. It's a very creative bathroom decoration. Again, not too much more to this point, pretty short and simple. International candy. Since I'm from the United States, my experience with international candy on Halloween, though limited, will be from that perspective. And with that, if I'm going strictly off my own personal Halloween experience, the only candy I ever got that could be considered international would be Toblerone. Outside that, I can't recall any times where I ever received any candy that was from another country, or even anything out of the ordinary. I mean, sometimes you'd get interesting variations of candy, but they'd all be items purchased at grocery stores, so again, it's not like someone brought a bunch of candy from another country and passed it out to trick-or-treaters. Since I don't have much to say about this point, and it's the third point in a row that's quite short, I'm gonna take some time to talk about some uncommon candies or favorites of mine. As a kid who had quite a few Pez dispensers, I actually really liked getting Pez because it let me use those dispensers again that just sat around, so I get that so many people find Pez boring, but I liked it. I don't even mean the candy itself, because Pez candy is quite plain and bland. I was just happy to be able to fill the dispensers. I guess I was just easily amused by them. I remember getting Butterfinger BBs a few times, which I don't think exist anymore. They were a variation of Butterfinger but in ball form, and were amazing. You'd also get those pumpkin-shaped Reese's, and those were awesome. Halloween was also one of the only times I'd ever have candy like Fun Dip or Pixie Sticks, and it was also exciting to get really uncommon candy. I remember getting those wax bottle candies, and I still have no idea what exactly they are or how you're supposed to eat them. Do you eat them? I never even bothered with them. I remember getting them a few times and I just didn't get it. Maybe I was just really dumb. I remember biting the cap and it tasted awful and that was it. Do you drink it? Do you drink the colored stuff inside it? Okay, so I looked it up. Apparently it's fruit-flavored syrup that's inside the bottles, and according to Wikipedia, the bottles can be chewed like gum, but aren't intended to be swallowed. That's interesting. Maybe I should give them another chance. Forgetting where you parked on Halloween. Okay, so my neighborhood on Halloween was always popping. It was a great neighborhood, and the only time my family would ever drive to another neighborhood, as I mentioned previously, was to go to that witch house. So we never left our car anywhere that was too far, and never experienced forgetting where we parked. Plus, honestly, my dad was always really good about remembering these things, like if we were at a theme park for the day or something. But I could imagine where this kind of thing could be really frustrating. You end up going down some streets you weren't familiar with, and eventually you have no idea where you are, and you're in a neighborhood you're not even familiar with, so yeah. That could create a bad situation, but in all honesty, I think it could be kind of fun, at least as a kid, because again, one of the joys of Halloween is going out at night and being able to walk around, so at least from my perspective, if this ever happened to me, I would just enjoy the fact that I got to be out for even longer. To go off on a completely different tangent for a moment, I think when parents are really against trick-or-treating or don't want their kids going out, but they use an excuse like, oh, I'll just buy them a bag of candy and they'll still have their candy and be happy. I don't think they realize that the candy you get from trick-or-treating is a collateral benefit, and the real joy of trick-or-treating was going out at night and wandering the streets, the exploration aspect. I mean, at least in my opinion, that's what I really loved about trick-or-treating. Am I alone in that? Well, my point is there's more to trick-or-treating than just the candy. The candy is just a bonus. Banned from the Halloween party. So, I don't really know if the creator of this iceberg was referring to some specific incident or just instances of people getting banned from Halloween parties. And like, using the word banned makes me think it's referring to a school event, because you don't get banned from going to a party that a peer is having, you just aren't invited. Growing up, my schools never had actual Halloween parties, but did have that fun day at school where basically you wouldn't do anything but watch movies, and the teacher would have candy to give to the kids, everyone would come dressed up. I remember in elementary school specifically, we did this Halloween costume parade type thing where we all just like walked around in a big line in our costumes and parents would come and see, and after that, you'd go from classroom to classroom trick-or-treating. This was really fun, but I don't remember doing it every year. It was mainly an elementary school thing, grades K to 5, since my school district had grades 6 to 8 for middle school. I imagine that there may have been some discipline where kids weren't allowed to participate, but honestly, I think punishments like that didn't start happening until middle school. I remember in middle school, if you did something bad, you could actually get punished into not participating in fun events. Or maybe you just had to do something really bad in elementary school to warrant being restricted from participating. Elementary school was the best time for holidays, and I don't remember middle school ever having days where all classes basically became a party. Maybe just your block class would, which for my school consisted of English and reading, but the rest of the classes would mostly be business as usual. Anyway, on to the next. School Halloween Party Bust. Much like the last point, I'm not entirely sure if the creator of the iceberg had a specific instance in mind. Usually a bust would mean like, the police break up a party, so maybe by school Halloween party they don't necessarily mean at school, just like school-aged kids, in which case I'm sure there are many cases of high school Halloween parties being busted by police due to underage drinking and all that. That's gotta be something that happens pretty often. And honestly, when it comes to high school parties, if it's not a party just for the hell of it, I think Halloween is the most likely holiday to have a party, so yeah, that's pretty fitting, I suppose. Through some simple searches, you can actually find reports of numerous high school Halloween parties being busted by the police due to underage drinking, so yeah, this point has to do with that. I unfortunately have no real stories to share about this, although my family did host a Halloween party every year and the turnout was always quite good. We never got busted for anything, at least not that I can remember. Will Halloween be with masks, or on virtual with no candy, but games and crypto? Well, that was a bit of a mouthful. So again, this iceberg was made during the COVID era, and as I said previously during the Zoom call Halloween, there was indeed a time where the holiday needed to be celebrated virtually, at least in regards to those in school. While I mentioned the Zoom Halloween games and all that, the part about crypto is kind of funny, like, what, are teachers going to give their kids Dogecoin for Halloween instead of candy? Like, I don't really understand what this iceberg creator meant by that, but I mean, crypto did get pretty big during COVID and was when the whole GameStop stock thing happened and Dogecoin, so it's all just part of the era, I suppose. This point in particular was one of the few with quotation marks, so I thought that maybe this was like a Reddit post that was made or some obscure comment, but after researching it for quite a while, I found nothing, so there you go. Old Zach King Halloween Vines. Zach King is a content creator who started off on Vine back in 2008 and would eventually move over to YouTube, where he still uploads regularly to this day. His content primarily consists of magic tricks using creative editing to make some truly awesome videos. Zach King calls his style digital sleight of hand, and that's quite appropriate. His videos are really entertaining, and he has quite a few of these magic videos that are Halloween focused. I had actually never heard of Zach King before doing research for this video, but I'm glad I found him. These videos are incredibly impressive. As someone who is fairly well versed in Vines, I'm surprised I'd never seen any of these. Some of these seem like they could have definitely been Vine staples, but I've never seen them in any Vine compilations. Angry Birds Halloween Season Games and Videos. Continuing from the point about Halloween gaming, Angry Birds is a game that would transform every October with a spooky Halloween overlay, and the Angry Birds YouTube channel also occasionally put out Halloween-themed Angry Birds videos. I really don't know much about Angry Birds outside the gameplay, which is indeed very satisfying, and I know it's incredibly nostalgic to many. It came out towards the end of when I was in high school, and I didn't get a smartphone capable of playing it until around 2011 or so. I had the LG Voyager for the longest time, then switched to the Droid 2, and I believe that was the first phone that allowed me to play games like Angry Birds, but anyway, this is getting off topic. Simply put, Angry Birds had a tradition of Halloween events in their games, and occasionally will put out fun short videos featuring the characters. I say had because I installed Angry Birds on my phone, which is now apparently called Angry Birds 2, and they don't seem to be doing anything for Halloween this year. Like, there's nothing Halloween-oriented at all on the app. I even played a few rounds to make sure, which is a real bummer, but I'm not even sure if kids are even playing Angry Birds anymore anyway. Spying on owners inside house while taking candy. Okay, this one's really funny. So, while trick-or-treating, you get a chance to go up to the front doors of houses in your neighborhood that you'd always see from the street but never had a reason to venture up to. Sometimes they were houses of neighbors that you'd see outside and wave to occasionally, and sometimes they were mysterious neighbors that, despite living in the neighborhood for years, you've never seen. Well, Halloween gives you the opportunity to go up to their front door, something you can't just normally do on any other day of the year, unless you had a reasonable excuse, like a ball went over into their backyard or something like that. You knock, say trick or treat, and while you wait for your candy, you're given a rare glimpse inside this mysterious home. I'm not sure if I ever gained anything useful from this, like my group of friends in our neighborhood weren't thieves or anything like that. It was really more for the mystery of seeing into a place that you've only ever seen from the outside. There were definitely houses on my street that I was always curious about, so that opportunity was kind of part of the fun and mystery nature of the Halloween season. Costumes that cause injuries. So I tried looking into specific costumes that were notorious for injuring kids, like maybe a popular costume one year had a part that was causing injuries or something to that effect, but I couldn't really find anything like that at all. The most common injury that I'm sure most people are to experience would be tripping, like say if the robe of your costume is too long or the mask you're wearing makes it really difficult to see out of. I also found a newspaper article about a 17-year-old who went blind in one eye due to using poorly made costume contact lenses for their costume, so I definitely think that counts. One thing that often pops up in costume safety articles is that longer costumes that have robes or draping parts could catch fire from jack-o'-lanterns, and, this appears to be a huge concern in online articles. A huge majority of them bring up this fear, yet it appears that it's never happened before, at least not from my research. Or maybe it's happened but just wasn't newsworthy? I'm sure anecdotally it's happened to people and it was stomped out immediately and just never caused any serious issue, but the amount of articles warning of it versus the lack of actual cases is kind of puzzling. On Reddit, I found a death certificate of a 13-year-old girl who died after her costume caught on fire after coming in contact with a gas stove. This happened back in 1931, and even though it's the only article I was able to find, it's still a very tragic accident, and while it's possible that if the costume wasn't involved, this wouldn't have happened, I don't think the costume was necessarily to blame. It was just a freak accident that just so happened to involve the costume. The costume itself causing injury would need to be like the material being made of something that causes skin rashes, or being unable to breathe due to how the costume was made, something along those lines. Anyway, on to the next. Punishment for taking extra candy. Another very specific point, I simply can't imagine any situation where anyone has been punished for taking extra candy when trick-or-treating. The only scenario I can imagine where a kid can take extra candy would be in one of those situations where a house leaves a bowl of candy out with a note saying, "Please take one." You see those Ring camera videos every year where a kid just picks up the whole bowl and dumps it into their bag and then leaves? While I'm sure no actual punishment from law enforcement comes from such a thing, if a house recognizes a kid who does this, then tells their parents, I'm sure any parent with a good head on their shoulders would reprimand their child and make them return the candy and apologize. I've even seen videos where people will set up pranks for those who attempt to take more candy than reasonable. Like, I get taking 2, fine, whatever, I wouldn't freak out about that. It even happens every year when I pass out candy. You hand out the bowl and the kids sometimes just grab a couple, whatever. YouTuber Mark Rober has a video where he pranks kids attempting to take more than the 1 candy per person as the sign above the bowl requests. They're pretty funny and well made. I'm pretty sure Mark Rober is the guy who did all those glitter bomb pranks on people attempting to steal packages off porches, so this seems right up his alley. Anyway, on to the next. Squid Game costumes this Halloween. Once again dating this Iceberg to when it was made, Squid Game was a huge deal when it came out on Netflix in September of 2021, and the following month, given the success of the series, Halloween costumes littered the shelves of Spirit Halloween, and I even saw quite a few children wearing costumes from the series. I always find it funny when children wear costumes from properties that they have no business watching, but, like, I guess that's always been the case. Just look at how many kids wear ghost face costumes throughout the years. Anyway, the simplicity of the Squid Game costumes, be it the outfits the contestants wear or the guards, make for very simple costumes to put together, and honestly, they look like they'd be quite comfortable. Even the guard masks look like they're made of mesh and could easily be seen through and are probably quite breathable. The thing I always hated about masks was how hot they'd get inside, so these look pretty good. Squid Game's popularity was pretty short-lived, but it's getting a few new seasons coming up, so that may renew interest, and we'll possibly see more Squid Game costumes during future Halloweens. Halloween ban in Jordan. Jordan is a country in the Middle East, and in 2014 decided to ban Halloween activities, as the events being held to celebrate the holiday were deemed satanic, with Jordan's Muslim Brotherhood group stating that the Halloween festivities, quote, present a challenge to the values of the Jordanian people and their Arab and Muslim identity, as well as a violation of religious laws. So, yeah, Jordan banned Halloween. From what I can find in more recent years, it appears that Halloween is still a controversial holiday in the country, though in 2022 I found that some were still attempting to celebrate in any way they could, and this seems to still be the case in the current year. I don't like black licorice. Black Licorice was a flash game hosted on the Nickelodeon website during the Halloween season. I'm unsure if the game would be removed and only available seasonally, but from my research it was first released in 2002, becoming a nightmare-inducing part of many kids' memories. The gameplay consists of handing out candy to trick-or-treaters, but if you give them black licorice, you get this. Yeah, pretty creepy stuff for 2002 children's game standards. Five Nights at Freddy's has nothing on this. This was the original jump scare game for children. That's right, even before the Scary Maze game, which came out in 2003. Anyway, there isn't much to say about this, other than it being a bit unsettling to children and a core memory to many. 4chan Halloween. So, I don't believe this is referring to one specific thing, but 4chan does of course have posts made by those on the site that may be Halloween focused, such as green text stories and whatnot. Back in like 2009, I remember people hosting horror movie streams around October, so that was fun. I did a bit of digging to see if they had done any pranks or raids or anything of the sort during the Halloween season, but it doesn't seem like that's ever been the case, or at the very least it wasn't centered around Halloween. Anyway, we have a lot more to go, so on to the next. Nick or Treat. Nick or Treat was an annual programming block running from 1985 to 2002 on Nickelodeon. The block featured Halloween-themed episodes of course, Nickelodeon shows, as well as live caller participation games and contests with prizes. According to the fan wiki, Nickipedia, Nick or Treat was cancelled in 2002 due to, quote, allegations of inappropriate language being used on the show. which I never personally experienced. Also, as a kid, I never truly believed the live segments were truly live, kind of like when they did You Pick Live, another programming block. However, this one wasn't for any particular holiday, but would claim to always be live, but I think that one actually was, looking back. Anyway, back to Nick or Treat. Of course, all of the games and live segments would have a Halloween theme, and with all of the commercials and episodes of your favorite shows also having a Halloween twist to them, nothing put me more in the Halloween spirit than watching some Nickelodeon. Luckily, there are quite a few uploads on YouTube and archive.org of entire Nick or Treat programming blocks complete with commercials, episodes of the shows, and all of the in-between Nick or Treat segments, so definitely check those out. It's a great dose of nostalgia. Halloween Mandela effects. While fairly well known, just for a quick rundown, Mandela effects are instances in which you recall something happening or existing that never did. One of the most famous examples of a Mandela effect are the Berenstain Bears books, which many remember being called Berenstain Bears. This effect is named after Nelson Mandela, president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999, who many falsely remember dying sometime in the 1980s or 90s, despite him living until 2013. This effect has been contributed to anything from a timeline skip, to quantum immortality, to CERN's Large Hadron Collider causing disturbances in time. Anyway, Halloween Mandela effects. Well, honestly, I can't find any. Any instances I find are just horror-themed, like movies or TV shows, not necessarily Halloween itself. But I guess they get passed around on Halloween, so I suppose they can be associated with the holiday. I don't find many of the ones I found to be true Mandela effects, just people misremembering. Like, one that came up a lot in my research was of the Salem witch trials, in which many remember learning that the witches were burned at the stake. Well, that's often more of a dramatic media portrayal, as in both England and here in the US, we like to hang our witches. Though in some rare instances, when other crimes were also committed, burning may have occurred, but from my research, only in England. A more appropriate Mandela effect would be around the names of certain candy, like Sweet Tarts, for example. Well, of course, it's spelled with only one T, but I could get the confusion of this one, being two T's or a space between the words, you know, that kind of thing. Kit Kat is another popular one, and centers around whether or not it's hyphenated. Well, it's not. This is one that I could definitely see a hyphen in the name, and sometimes when I look at it without it, it definitely looks off, but yeah, those are some Mandela effects, and while none I could find are truly Halloween focused, hopefully some of these were fun and made you question your own memory. Fake serial killings on family or friends. I don't even know where to begin with this one. I thought maybe it would be about pranks on YouTube or something like that, but that doesn't seem to be the case. There are many dead body pranks on YouTube where people will call over repair people and surprise them with something like body parts in a refrigerator. You know, something along those lines. But I haven't found any instances where people fake serial killings. I don't even know how they'd go about doing such a thing. It also kind of reminds me of those clown prank videos people were doing back in 2016. So yeah, the best I have for this one is prank videos, and honestly they are pretty funny. I don't really know if there's something specific that the creator of this Iceberg was referring to, and they seemed to vanish on Reddit quite a few years ago, so there's no way to contact them, so I'm just doing my best here. Anyway, on to the next. People dressing up as serial killers and criminals controversy. Dressing up as Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, or Jason Voorhees is one thing, but when people start dressing up as serial killers that actually existed and killed real people, that's when things can become a little questionable and could be seen as in poor taste. I know Jeffrey Dahmer was a fairly common costume in 2022 after the Netflix show Monster came out, which had a portion of it being about him. Online retailer eBay even banned the sale of Halloween costumes portraying Jeffrey Dahmer after the surge of popularity during the 2022 Halloween season. Other controversial costumes have included Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, Richard Ramirez, John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, and countless more. We'll be talking about some more infamous costumes a little later on, so...
More on that later.
Pay to get candy. In my research for this point, I actually found something that was the exact opposite. A news report that was actually only posted a couple days ago reported on a company known as Healthy Wage that will actually give you cash for unwanted Halloween candy. This candy is then donated to various organizations, including various branches of the military. Now, on the other hand, what this point is actually about, paying to get candy. Can't you just, go to the store and buy a bag of candy that people pass out on Halloween? I'm not really understanding this one. As a matter of fact, it's probably the point on this iceberg I understand the least so far. I wish I had more to say, but I really don't, so on to the next. Other origins of Halloween than the Gaelic origin. While many of our Halloween traditions, from jack-o'-lanterns to trick-or-treating to costumes, come from the Gaelic and Celtic traditions of Samhain, it's believed that some of these traditions may date back even further, to earlier pagan festivals that eventually became Samhain, and eventually Halloween. The well-known alternative name for Halloween, All Hallows' Eve, actually has Christian origins, being, as the name implies, the day before All Hallows' Day, or All Saints' Day, which of course is a day in which saints are honored. This day would be November 1st, with All Hallows' Eve being October 31st. Even with a more religious take on the holiday, the focus of All Hallows' Eve and All Hallows' Day still touches upon the souls of those who have passed, and by the 12th century, bells would be rung from churches and streets in remembrance of the dead. This is also where the practice of trick-or-treating, in a very early form, would take place, as children and poor people would go door to door, praying for the souls of the deceased in exchange for food. I'm sure there is so much more I could go into on this topic. History is infinitely fascinating, and if I ever get around to a video that focuses more on history, I'd love to really deep dive into it then. DID altar for Halloween. Okay, so DID stands for Dissociative Identity Disorder, which is a mental health condition in which a person has multiple personality states, and these states are known as alters. Now, I don't feel I should speak too much on this, as I have zero experience with DID, nor do I know what Halloween has to do with the disorder, but I did find a Reddit post that explains it a bit, and yeah, I still have no idea. Sorry. I'm guessing that maybe, one of your alters is your personality on Halloween night? Or maybe, you don't like Halloween, but one of your alters does? I'm not sure if alters as personalities also mean you change your likes and dislikes. I have very little knowledge about this disorder. Can an alter enjoy certain foods while other alters don't? Does it work like that? If anyone has any information on this, I'd love to learn more. It's really quite fascinating. But anyway, that's all on that. People dressing up as Nazis or Hitler on Halloween. Okay, so continuing from the serial killer Halloween costume point, I think it's pretty safe to say that dressing up as Hitler or a Nazi is in poor taste, but it actually happens more often than you'd think. Or maybe it happens just as often as you'd think. I guess it really depends on how you view the world. Well, it happens. A man in 2022 even reportedly got fired from his job for dressing up as Hitler. And it wasn't even to a work event. Pictures simply got posted online and he was fired for it. So, yeah, it's a pretty bad idea. It would be like wearing a Klan robe for Halloween. It's really just asking for trouble. Actual weapons being used for Halloween costumes. The one thing that completes a Michael Myers or a Ghostface costume is, of course, their signature knives, and for most people, picking up a plastic one at Spirit Halloween is perfect, but for some, I guess that's just not real enough. Knives are one thing, but the one prop that it seems everyone absolutely needs to be the real deal is chainsaws. Yeah, you'd think something as heavy as a real chainsaw would be more likely to make people settle for a fake prop, but no. Chainsaws on Halloween are super popular, whether it be for neighborhood houses or even Universal Studios Hollywood Horror Nights, which has an event called the Chainsaw Chaseout in which numerous scare actors parade down part of the park with real chainsaws. Now, the thing about chainsaws is that you can simply remove the chain, and upon doing so, they become functionally useless, but you can still rev them, making their signature sound, and since chainsaws are so loud, they're a perfect jump scare tool. It's also kind of alarming at how many Reddit posts are out there asking if it would be okay to use real guns as part of a costume. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand open carry states are a thing, but as part of a costume, I just feel it's asking for trouble, especially if you're dressing up for a party or something. Drugged candy. The fear of candy being laced with drugs has been a concern for decades, but has mostly remained in the realm of urban legend. Despite this legend dating back to, from my research, the 1960s, no documented reports have ever been made that children received candy laced with any form of drugs, and, I mean, let's be real, drugs are expensive. What right-minded adult wants to waste their precious drugs on children? Jokes aside, there are other hazards that are commonly feared to be found within children's trick-or-treat bags, and we'll get to that soon, so...
More on that later.
Layer 5. Taking all candy when owner isn't watching. This point is a lot like what I talked about earlier in the point about taking extra candy. Again, some people on Halloween will simply set a bowl out in front of their house and trust that, on the honor system, people will just take 1 or maybe 2 pieces of candy. Well, of course, you will inevitably get that one jerk kid who takes a massive handful, or worse yet, just dumps the entire bowl into their bag. I can't imagine any situation where this point makes sense if the owner is actually answering the door, because usually they're holding the bowl and putting the candy into the trick-or-treaters' bags. Or, at least, that's what I do every year. Maybe, like, I don't know, they comically try to make the person answering the door turn around, then reach for the bowl and grab what they can and run away, but realistically, I'm pretty sure it's just my initial explanation. That happens all the time. Skelebaner. Okay, this is a short one. Spirit Halloween has a skeleton costume that has an extra bone on it, and it's called Skelebaner. Get it? Yeah. I don't have much else to say, that's the entire joke. Halloween Rule 34. Do I really need to explain this one? So, the thing that I think many people forget is these rules were actually just 4chan rules, more specifically rules of B, the random board. Rule 34 states that if it exists, there is porn of it, no exceptions. Rule 35 is one that people often overlook, but it states that if there is no porn of it, porn will be made of it, which is quite true. And that, of course, leads us to Halloween Rule 34. I'm not even sure what that exactly means, because Halloween is a holiday, but I suppose any Rule 34 would simply be Halloween situations, or like, I don't know, those traditional white sheet ghosts, but they're like, sexy, I guess? Best not to think too much into it. Sexually suggestive costumes. Wow, 3 in a row. Okay, so Halloween costumes being sexual in nature has been a thing for decades, and it's really funny how absurd some of these costumes get. Like, some of them are just so completely devoid of any thought or creativity. Like, look at this. It's just a dress with emojis on it. Or like, what? Sexy Eric Cartman? Why does this exist? Sexy Cat in the Hat? Like, I guess at least these are costumes resembling characters, unlike the emoji dress. In a similar vein to the emoji dress, we also have fake news dress, guitar dress, sexy pizza, and sexy Bambi. Like, if someone wants to wear a sexually suggestive costume, that's completely fine by me. I think I just don't understand the appeal of wanting to wear something so lazy. So, in a way, this point just becomes me ranting about lazy, quote-unquote sexy costumes, because real sexy costumes do exist out there, but I think we all know that when this point was referring to sexually suggestive costumes, it was specifically talking about the really lazy, uninspired ones, right? Anyway, moving on. Expired candy with no notice. This one is actually of very little concern. Did you know that most candy is completely safe even long after its shelf life, and there's next to no danger of illness when it comes to consuming expired candy? I mean, maybe if it's like multiple years old, but even then, an article I found states that the worst that'll happen is that the candy's taste and texture may be off, but illness or anything of the sort is highly unlikely, so, you know what? If you find a candy from last year in your trick-or-treat bag, it just might be perfectly safe. Cross-dressing on Halloween. A popular trend is cross-dressing for Halloween. Men wearing cheerleader costumes, or women wearing costumes with large beards, you know, that sort of thing. I've read on multiple Reddit threads that many closeted crossdressers use Halloween as an opportunity to cross-dress in public, and will pass it off as a joke, when to them, it's something they truly enjoy doing. It seems that those who cross-dress for gender reasons seem to agree that cross-dressing on Halloween isn't insensitive in and of itself, in that, barring a few exceptions, everyone should be free to dress up however they like on Halloween. You know, except Nazis and stuff. That's probably still not the best idea. PTSD of familiar trauma on Halloween. Those with PTSD of specific traumas can have a very difficult time on Halloween. Given the holiday's tradition of people jumping out and scaring others with masks and other horror-themed festivities, these situations can prove to be a bit too much for those who suffer from these mental conditions. Unfortunately, many who suffer from PTSD have to avoid Halloween altogether, though there are coping mechanisms that some are able to implement to make the holiday more bearable, allowing them to still enjoy it as they had before suffering from PTSD. I read through multiple conversations on Reddit about the constant knocking at the door being a PTSD trigger, as well as the previously mentioned jump scares, and the way those with PTSD can avoid these situations, such as leaving candy out for trick-or-treaters with a sign asking them not to knock, using noise-canceling headphones and enjoying their favorite media, and so on. Religion-related costumes. Every year you can find costumes of nuns, priests, even the Pope, and some find these costumes to be in poor taste. There are, of course, sexy nun costumes, which kind of take us back a few points ago to the sexually suggestive costumes, and yeah, I can see where that kind of thing can offend people, but I don't see too much harm in it. I've even seen people dress up as Jesus Christ for Halloween, so it seems religious costumes don't get too controversial, but I suppose it could also just depend on where you live. Like, if you live in a more religious community or state, it may not go over as well, but again, these costumes do indeed exist and are fairly easy to find, so there's definitely a market for them. Traditional devil costumes have been a staple of Halloween for decades, even back into the 50s, and the devil is technically a religion-related costume. Angel costumes have also been incredibly popular, though, of course, not the biblically accurate angels, more like the humans with wings kind. Biblically accurate angel costumes do exist though, and you can find various examples online. Costumes using imagery of Buddhism, Hindu, and various other religions also exist, but whether or not any of these would be considered culturally insensitive to wear is up to you. Girl that used real bees that died naturally at an apiary for her Candyman costume. Okay, when I first read this, I thought that someone died from putting real bees all over them, before I realized I'd misread it. So, an apiary is simply where beekeepers keep their bees. I'm sure many of you have seen images or videos of those multiple boxes in a row, each one containing a beehive. Well, a post made to Reddit shows a woman who used real bees that had died naturally at a local apiary for her Candyman costume. Candyman is a 1992 horror movie in which the killer kills his victims after they say Candyman 5 times in the mirror, much like the Bloody Mary urban legend. In one infamous scene, Candyman reveals thousands of bees under his coat and coming out of his mouth, which is where the bee inspiration for this costume comes from. It's honestly very impressive and creative. The post only has 21 upvotes and 7 comments, and was the only instance of the upload I could find, so I'm not sure many people ever saw this, but I think it's pretty cool, so yeah. I love unique costumes like this, it's very creative. Costumes that no one will guess or understand. This comes down to choosing an obscure or lesser-known character for your Halloween costume. Or, at least usually. The funny thing is, sometimes you can wear a costume of a character incredibly well-known, and some people will still get it wrong. I guess that can come down to how well the costume matches the character. One year, when I was around 5 or so, I dressed as Luke Skywalker, specifically Episode 4 Luke. I had my lightsaber and everything, and I was going trick-or-treating from house to house, and one guy I vividly remember asked if I was a ninja, and I was so offended. I simply corrected him, but still, I remember that so well, and honestly, my costume was put together very well. I think it was pretty obvious who I was, but ninjas were very popular that year, especially since that was the time Mortal Kombat was gaining popularity. There were a lot of Sub-Zero and Scorpion costumes. But yeah, as more obscure web animation and video games gain fan bases, a lot of those fans want to express their love of the characters and will dress up as them, even if it's fairly obscure. This year, I'm hoping to see at least one Murder Drone's Halloween costume on Halloween night, but I guess we'll see. Costumes that cost your life, or lead to needing surgery. So, back to when we were discussing costumes that cause injuries, I also was researching for this point and couldn't find any costumes that explicitly were responsible for the deaths of anyone. The worst I can find that led to requiring surgery is still the instance with the man who went blind from using a cheap contact lens in his eye, which is absolutely horrific. I've never worn glasses, and the thought of any contact lens going in my eyes kinda freaks me out. It always impresses me when people use really cool-looking contacts in costumes, but I don't think it's something I'd ever be able to do. So yeah, from the research I've done, outside that one instance of eye surgeries from the contacts, no deaths have ever been reported that were directly caused by a specific costume. Same goes for surgeries. Upon Googling Halloween costume deaths, the Google AI says there have been deaths associated with Halloween costumes, but gives 0 examples, and I'm not finding any articles that directly blame a costume for someone's death. So, if you know of any examples, please share in the comments. I'd love to know if anything like this has ever happened. 17 Halloween sex positions to satisfy all your cravings. Okay, here we go again. So, this was an article posted to Cosmopolitan's website back in 2021, and it's pretty much exactly what the title says. Cosmopolitan, in both its magazine and website, always feature sexually suggestive articles like this, and have for years. Honestly, I'm trying to keep this video fairly PG-13, so I can't really get into this one too much. Again, it's exactly what the title of the point says, so do with that what you will. Illegality of being a priest on Halloween. So, contrary to what I said in the point about religion-related Halloween costumes, you may want to reconsider dressing up as a priest, a nun, a rabbi, or a member of clergy if you live in the state of Alabama. Or you could be facing a $500 fine, a year in jail, or both. Any other state, you're good to dress up as a priest any day of the year you want, but if you do so in Alabama, even if it's Halloween, you might want to be a bit careful. Reportedly, according to public records, no one has ever been prosecuted for wearing any of these costumes, so it may be one of those weird laws that are outdated yet still technically in the books. So if you're in Alabama, just be careful if you really want to go dressed up as one of these religious figures. Lost media based on Halloween. Lost media and Halloween are a match made in heaven, and from horror movies to Halloween specials, there's quite a bit of lost media out there that can fit with the Halloween spirit. As I mentioned in my cell animation video, many lost horror films from the early 1900s up to the 1950s no longer exist, such as The Holy Grail, London After Midnight. This horror movie's last known print was destroyed in a fire in 1965. There is a chance that a copy could be found in the future, hidden away in a private collection, but as of today, it's one of the most famous lost films of all time. Television bumpers, interstitials, and commercials that aired specifically for the Halloween season are also very likely to be lost, but very likely could be in a VHS collection from someone's childhood when they asked their parents to tape an episode of a specific show for them while they were at school. Actually, going back to the Nick or Treat Halloween block, in the year 2000, Nickelodeon aired a made-for-TV movie called Crybaby Lane. This movie was only ever aired a single time and was considered lost for over a decade until finally being re-aired again in 2011. The funny thing is, despite the 2011 rebroadcast, this movie was sitting on someone's VHS tape of the entire 2000 Nick or Treat special. Someone recorded the entire movie and, after realizing it was considered lost, uploaded it to YouTube in 2011. Of course, shortly after this, Nickelodeon themselves would finally re-air the movie in October of that year, but still, it's fascinating how something publicly aired can go missing so easily. The hit children's animated series The Magic School Bus had a Halloween special that aired on Halloween of 1995 and was deemed lost for over 20 years until finally it was found, once again, on a tape that someone had from their childhood. This Halloween special was very unique as it featured both animated and live-action segments, whereas the Magic School Bus show was, from my memory anyway, entirely animated. There's a lot more that could be discussed, mostly in regards to movies and TV, but really, that would be an entire video on its own. I bet I could easily do a video well over an hour in length, just talking about spooky lost media. Let me know if that's something you'd like to see, or any other video ideas. Apple bobbing in urine and alcohol, plus death from doing so. Bobbing for apples has actually been around for thousands of years. Dating back to the Roman Empire, traditions were merged with Celtic festivals where bobbing for apples was a common tradition. This would of course lead to its inclusion in the Festival of Samhain, which, as mentioned previously, was a precursor of sorts to the Halloween we know today. Of course, bobbing for apples as a Halloween staple has made many appearances in media, but I've honestly never actually done it myself, or seen anyone else doing it for that matter, and I've been to many Halloween parties. To be honest, I actually find it pretty gross, because I could only imagine how much people would be drooling into the water trying to get apples in their mouths. Or maybe I'm just a germaphobe in that kind of situation. Now, this point specifically mentions bobbing for apples in urine and alcohol. Obviously, urine would be disgusting. Alcohol makes at least a bit more sense. Like, I get it, I could see that being a college thing or whatever, but here's where things get crazy. In October of 2018, a 20-year-old student named Ed Farmer actually died from bobbing for apples in a mixture of alcohol and urine, as part of a college initiation ritual. To be fair, it sounds like there was a lot more to this initiation than just the bobbing for apples that led to their death, but still. I can't find any other instances of anyone dying from doing such a thing, so I'm certain that that's what this point was about. While bobbing for apples and urine is disgusting, again, I'm sure people do it with alcohol often enough. Poisoned candy and sharp objects hidden in candy myths. This is kind of a continuation of the whole drugs and candy myth that we discussed earlier. Continuing along with that subject, we have the urban legend of candy being poisoned or sharp objects, specifically syringes and razor blades, being hidden inside candy. Once again, this all, for the most part, isn't true, and isn't a concern for children's safety while out trick-or-treating. There have been various reports of razor blades being found in Halloween candy over the years, but it's certainly a rare occurrence. The poisoning of candy, however, while generally regarded as entirely a myth, does have some truth to it, but we'll get into that in a little bit, so...
More on that later.
Blackface and Halloween costumes controversy. Blackface is the practice of using makeup, or other material, to darken skin in order to portray a caricature of a black person. This practice was very common throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s, and has since been considered culturally and racially insensitive. You'd think that's common sense and goes without saying, but no, because even in the year 2024, people still try to use blackface in Halloween costumes. Even as I write this script, there's news of someone wearing blackface for a P. Diddy costume at San Diego State University, so yeah, this kind of stuff still happens. The thing about blackface is that it's up to the person who chooses to do it, but what about costumes that essentially do the same thing, but you buy them at the store? Because yes, they do exist, and we'll be talking about that in just a moment. Mix-up of arresting someone with the same costume of the suspect. So, mixing up suspects and arresting the wrong person has certainly happened throughout recent history, but arresting someone in a costume because someone else wearing the same costume was reported to the police? That's a bit trickier to find any information on, and nothing easily comes up. I'm willing to bet this has been the plot of a TV show somewhere. Actually, it's really funny. There's that one scene in Halloween 2 from 1981 where Dr. Loomis sees someone out on Halloween night wearing a very similar costume to Michael Myers, and actually attempts to shoot him before a cop car out of nowhere slams into the person, pinning them against a van before it bursts into flames. It's actually insane. It's such a ridiculous scene. Like, I get the urgency of tracking down Michael Myers, but they just, killed some guy, and I love how the cop said he came out of nowhere. The guy was in the street for quite a while and was fairly well lit. Not to mention, if the person wasn't there, would the cop just have ran into the van? Why was he going so fast on a residential street filled with kids on Halloween night? Anyway, this point has gotten way off track. There have been no public reports of anyone being falsely arrested on Halloween because they were wearing the same costume as someone else, and I'm sure if it did happen, it'd be all over the news and social media. Creepy coincidences of Halloween that are also dangerous. This is a bit of a dead-end point. I did a bit of research trying to find any coincidences on Halloween, like maybe common things that happen throughout the holiday that could be seen as macabre or strange, but really, there's nothing. I wish I could contact the creator of this Iceberg for more information, but again, they seem to have vanished off Reddit, so I'm left alone to piece together this iceberg as best I can. While this isn't dangerous, I did find this fun Reddit post. The picture is of the Bamboo Health Building, with quite a few of its lights out, with the exception of Boo, and their symbol kind of looks like an eyeball, so that's pretty cool, and it happened near Halloween, so that technically counts as a coincidence. Disturbing health stories related to Halloween candy. As I mentioned earlier, candy doesn't really pose a threat if it expires, and any stories of tampering with candy are mostly urban legends. The real health risk of candy most likely comes down to the most predictable thing you can imagine. Tooth decay, cavities, all that stuff. And yeah, you can get a stomachache from eating too much candy, but really, there aren't any true health scares from eating too much candy. Since I managed to find some interesting tampering with candy stories while researching this, I'll throw those in as a bonus. In 1959, California dentist William Shine distributed 450 candies laced with laxatives, resulting in 30 children becoming ill from this, and Shine being charged with unlawful dispensing of drugs. How he wasn't charged with child endangerment is anyone's guess, but there's a decent chance that law didn't exist yet. Shocking, I know. In 1964, Helen Feel of New York handed out bags of arsenic-laced ant traps, metal mesh scrubbing pads, and dog biscuits to trick-or-treaters. She was later arrested and claimed it to be a joke, as the ones she handed it to were, quote, too old to be trick-or-treating. Luckily, no one was injured in any way or ingested the poison, and Helen Feel would be charged with 2 counts of child endangerment. We've of course got an infamous incident of candy tampering that I haven't gotten into yet because it's got its own point, so we'll get to that shortly. True urban legends. I love urban legends. Like, I'm obsessed with them. I'm so obnoxiously obsessed with urban legends that one time, a teacher was telling a story in class about how a friend of theirs who worked in a jail had an inmate that overdosed on LSD, and forever thought that they were an orange, and thought everyone who came near them wanted to peel their skin off, because, you know, you peel oranges. Well, me, being the completely socially inept kid with zero concept of social awareness, just immediately said, actually, that's a real popular urban legend, completely shutting her story down. I feel really bad about it. If I cared enough, I should have waited until after class when no one else was around to talk to her about it, but nope, I had to be that kid. It also happened another time when a friend was driving us home. I don't remember the entire situation, but they tried telling us a story about how their uncle, who was also a cop, had the exact same story as the teacher, except this time the inmate thought they were a glass of orange juice and thought people would try to drink him. And in my research, that's the more common version of the story, but anyway, this point is about true urban legends, so let's get into that. Urban legends about animals, specifically rats, but sometimes even alligators, crawling through pipes and into toilets is actually true, at least in regards to rats, not so much to alligators. Another popular urban legend is of the guests staying at a hotel who, through their stay, notice a putrid odor emitting from somewhere, but they can't seem to track it down. Eventually, one of the guests looks under the bed and is horrified to find a decaying corpse. This is a fairly popular urban legend, and is also one that actually happened before, specifically in 2010 in Memphis, Tennessee. I tried finding urban legends that were more Halloween-focused, because this is a Halloween iceberg, but the ones that are true actually have a point coming up about them, so...
More on that later.
More costumes based off racial stereotypes. So, on top of blackface costumes that we talked about earlier, there are many instances of costumes being based off racial stereotypes, or appropriating cultures. The one that always immediately comes to mind is the Maui costume from the Disney movie Moana. The controversy behind this costume was primarily due to the fact that the bodysuit emulated a dark skin tone and tribal tattoos. This costume was said to be pulled from shelves, but some definitely got out because I saw someone wearing this at a party in 2023. Yes, they were an adult, and no, I don't think they knew of the controversy, but who knows. Many other stereotyped costumes have existed over the years, from Fu Manchu costumes to, quote, terrorist costumes. You get the idea. Back in 2011 or so, I remember a company releasing campaign posters against racially insensitive costumes, reading, "This is not who I am, and this is not okay," with a person from a certain ethnicity holding up a picture of someone wearing a costume based off a stereotype. It seems every year a new costume or two comes out that causes controversy, so while you'd think this would become less and less common as time goes on, that doesn't seem to be the case. Body hanging from tree mistaken for Halloween decoration. On October 26, 2005, an unnamed woman hanged herself from a tree near her home. For several hours, her body remained in plain sight from the highway that passed right beside where she had hanged herself, with many mistaking the corpse for nothing more than a Halloween decoration. The body was noticed as early as 7:30 that morning, but police didn't get involved until 11 a.m., 3.5 hours later. Reportedly, the woman lived about a quarter of a mile away from the site of the hanging. There are similar stories of this happening, and they have a whole point on their own, so we'll get to that shortly. Actual murders and felonies on Halloween. There have been murders committed on Halloween, and I'm sure countless felonies, so let's just cover some murders, because if we were to get into felonies, we'd be here all day. On Halloween night of 2010 in Martin, Ohio, 16-year-old Devin Griffin would come home from an evening out with friends to discover the horrific murder of his stepfather, William Lisk, brother, Derek Griffin, and mother, Susan Lisk. These murders were carried out by Devin's stepbrother, William Lisk, who committed the murders with a claw hammer and .22 caliber rifle. William Lisk was convicted on 3 counts of aggravated murder and was sentenced to 3 life sentences with no chance of parole. In 2015, while serving his time in prison, William Lisk would be found dead in his cell from a self-inflicted wound. Another Halloween murder takes us to Sun Valley, California in 1957. Late in the evening of Halloween night, a knock at the door surprises 35-year-old Peter Fabiano. Assuming it to be a trick-or-treater, Fabiano answers the door with a bowl of candy, asking, "It's a little late for this, isn't it?" before a gunshot would be heard by his wife, Betty Fabiano. The gunman would flee, and Peter Fabiano would succumb to his gunshot wound. 5 months later, in March of 1958, detectives would eventually find the one responsible for the killing, only it actually ended up being 2 perpetrators. 43-year-old Goldine Pizer and 40-year-old Joan Rabel both pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The reason for this senseless killing? Peter's wife, Betty, had stayed with Joan while she and Peter were having marital problems. Betty, who was bisexual or possibly lesbian at a time when being either was incredibly uncommon and unjustly frowned upon, became a person of romantic interest to Joan. Upon learning of the marriage troubles between Betty and Peter, Joan saw it as justification to act and would embellish the level of relationship trouble to Goldine in order to convince her to help kill Peter. Goldine would actually be the one who knocked on the door that Halloween night, shooting Peter and escaping with Joan. The 2 would be sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. Goldine Pizer would be released from prison and reside in Los Angeles until her death in 1998 at the age of 83. And as for Joan Rabel, there's really no information on her that's easily found, at least to my research. Costumes that use actual blood or gore. So, I actually couldn't find too many instances of this, which is good because it would be pretty gross. I found one instance of a woman using her blood for her Chucky costume, so, that's something. Luckily, this isn't too common, and there were no reports of people using, body parts or anything, so that's good. I was actually concerned about finding, someone using dismembered animal parts or something, but luckily nothing of that sort came up, so we're good. On to the next. Other cases of dead corpses being mistaken as decorations. There are surprisingly a few cases of this happening apart from the case I mentioned a few points back, so let's discuss a few more instances of real corpses being mistaken as Halloween decorations. In October of 2009, the body of a 75-year-old man with a self-inflicted gunshot wound sat on a balcony of an apartment complex for several days in Marina del Rey, California, with many neighbors assuming it to simply be an elaborate Halloween decoration. And from the ground, looking 3 stories up, where his balcony was located, I could see how it may be difficult to see some details to determine whether or not the body was real. Another instance of a body being mistaken as a prop happened in 2023 in China Grove, North Carolina. The body of 34-year-old Robert Paul Owens laid on the lawn of an abandoned house as the caretaker of the property mowed the lawn, simply going around his body. The worker told police that he believed the body to simply be a Halloween decoration. From my research, the cause of death in this case hasn't been revealed, and considering Robert's body was found naked leaves many questions that remain unanswered, at least as far as internet research can find. Another incident occurred in October of 2015 where the body of 31-year-old Rebecca Cade was found hanging from a chain-link fence. A man was arrested in connection to the crime, but was found not guilty, and from my research, no further arrests have been made. Rebecca Cade's death remains a mystery to this day. Halloween kidnappings and abductions from bait. Considering the staggering amount of children across the world who are out wandering the streets at night on Halloween, it's easy for your mind to wander into the territory of what-ifs. Many safety concerns around children wandering the streets at night pop up, from cars to getting lost to, of course, the many strangers they'll meet on their trick-or-treating journey. There have, of course, been cases throughout the years of children being abducted on Halloween, be it from cars pulling up alongside children, to adults offering children to enter their home for more candy upon knocking on their door. There are a surprising number of almost kidnapped stories on Reddit that happened on Halloween, and a few attempted cases that have gotten media attention. Of course, Reddit stories can always be made up, so take those with a grain of salt, and real instances of kidnappings happening on Halloween are actually a bit uncommon, probably because of the large amount of people around, and children often being with an adult. One case in Anderson, California in 2011 took place when 31-year-old April Swartz abducted her neighbor's 2 kids. Luckily, after an Amber Alert was sent out, her car was recognized and reported by various groups of trick-or-treaters, and the children were luckily unharmed. April was sentenced to 180 days in jail with 3 years of probation. Another possible kidnapping case takes us back to Halloween of 1955 in Long Island, New York, in which 2-year-old Stephen Craig Damon went missing, along with his 7-month-old sister Pamela, who was in a baby carriage. The two were shockingly left outside a store while their mother was inside. Pamela was found, still in her carriage, around the corner from the store, which obviously means that she was pushed away from where she was left, but by who is the mystery. Did her 2-year-old brother push her? Did someone attempt to abduct both of them but decide to just take Steven? Unfortunately, the mystery has remained to this day. The Damon family had received multiple ransom notes that the police deemed to be hoaxes or cruel pranks. As of 2024, the disappearance of Stephen Damon remains unsolved. As of the making of this video, Steve Damon would be 71 years old. Homes that should not be knocked on or disturbed on Halloween. This is a more personal iceberg point. I feel that most people who grew up in a traditional suburb neighborhood always have that one house that's kind of off. Like, maybe you never see the people who live there, or maybe when you do, they're very reclusive. There was a house like that on our street. An old man lived there, and if you ever stepped on his driveway or lawn, he'd yell at us kids to get off his property. With that, we all knew not to even bother going up to his house on Halloween, and to be honest, I don't recall seeing other kids attempt to trick-or-treat at his house either. Probably because he kept all of his lights off. There were other houses in the neighborhood that were just kind of creepy. There was a street near my house that was a private street, and all of the houses were very strange, and one was even abandoned. I remember that house being really creepy and going to check it out with friends a few times, but considering that it was on a normal street where the houses are spaced out by no more than 50 feet, getting caught was always a concern. The house has since been torn down, but the yard still remains, at least since the last time I wandered around that area. If you have any stories about a creepy house in your neighborhood that everyone avoided or dared each other to go knock on the front door of, post the story in the comments. I'd really love to read those. I love those kinds of stories. Ronald Clark O'Brien. Ronald Clark O'Brien, also known as the Candyman, is likely the most infamous Halloween murderer, and this point on the iceberg is connected to many previous points, especially about poisoned candy. Let's get into it. On the night of Halloween 1974 in Pasadena, Texas, Ronald would take his 2 children trick-or-treating along with his neighbor and their 2 children. While trick-or-treating, Ronald would give Pixie Stix candies that he claimed he received from a house that the children left before the door opened to be given candy. Later, upon returning home, Ronald would give a 5th Pixie Stick to a trick-or-treater who knocked on their door. Before going to bed that night, Ronald allowed his children to have some Halloween candy, with his son Timothy choosing to have the Pixie Stick. Shortly after, Timothy complained of stomach pains before the child began vomiting and convulsing. On the way to the hospital, Timothy would die at just 8 years old. Autopsy would confirm that Timothy's death had been caused by a lethal dose of potassium cyanide. The death caused by poisoned Halloween candy caused panic in the local community, as many parents feared that their children too may have contaminated candy. Luckily, during a mass investigation, the other 4 pixie sticks were successfully recovered without any other children being harmed. Ronald was questioned on the candy, in which he explained where he had received it from. Police proceeded to check every house in the neighborhood, confirming none of the houses had pixie sticks that they were passing out on Halloween night, and the one house that Ronald claimed to receive them from belonged to an air traffic controller who had worked that evening until 11 p.m., ruling him out as the one who provided the pixie sticks. Police would eventually discover the mountaining debt that Ronald had accrued over the years, his trouble keeping a job, and, most damning, life insurance policies taken out on both of his children in January of 1974, slowly taking out larger policies throughout the year, and inquiring on collecting the life insurance policy the very day after Timothy's death. Ronald was arrested and charged with capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder, and sentenced to death by lethal injection. During the execution, a large crowd of around 300 gathered outside the prison, cheering, while some even yelled, "Trick or treat." Truly a horrific case, and one of the most infamous moments in Halloween history. And that was a deep dive into this Halloween iceberg. This video was a complete last-minute thing. I originally had planned another iceberg specifically for Halloween, but it was taking way too long to make. I realistically think it's going to be an 8 to 9 hour long video whenever it does get done, but I really wanted to do something for Halloween so badly that I found this iceberg on Reddit and thought, why not? At the very least, it's a fun little video that doesn't require a whole lot of research, because many of these points include personal stories, and I love sharing those. Halloween is my favorite holiday of the year. I absolutely love horror. My birthday is just a couple days before Halloween. I've always considered October to very much be my month. I just completely engross myself in it. I think I said in my last video that the next video would be video game related again, but again, this was a completely last-minute video idea, and it pushed me into making a video in a much shorter time frame. I actually am finishing it on Halloween. Like, I'm seriously pushing myself to make this video a reality, because if it doesn't get released tonight, I'll have to sit on it for another year. If you notice the video portions being a bit on the lazier side, it's because I really wanted this video to be released, so it may feel a lot more like my older videos where there isn't much to watch visually and it's more of an audio experience. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this video and that you love Halloween as much as I do. If I release it early enough in the day, I hope you're able to enjoy it while preparing for your evening, and if I release it later in the day, I hope you get to listen to it as you're passing out candy or winding down for the night. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you have a swell day.